And my name is Matt Kinzera. I'm the Executive Director of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice and WIVEC. WIVEC stands for Wisconsin Interfaith Voter Engagement Campaign. And that's what this webinar, Faithful Voices in a Critical Hour, is through WIVEC. WIVEC is nonpartisan civic engagement work. The main things that we do are things like this, where we do webinars, make sure that we're getting important information and important perspectives out there into the world. We also are getting close to launching one of our main democracy defense pieces, which is our Poll Chaplain program. And we'll be really digging in on that starting in August. And speaking of that, our next Faithful Voices in a Critical Hour webinar series in August will be all about the Poll Chaplain program and how we use that program to protect polling locations across Wisconsin and in collaboration with others across the entire nation. And then, of course, we're getting information out there on how to vote, when to vote, where to vote, etc. Another really amazing thing that we are just finishing, and I'm going to highlight this in case there's anybody even remotely close to Appleton, but we did something this year called Faith 250, and we did it in Appleton and Milwaukee, where we gathered first clergy members and then the general public. And what we did is we studied four of the founding documents of our country. I'm not going to try to pretend to remember all of them, but I know it was America the Beautiful. I know we did What to the Slave is the 4th of July,
The New
um,
Colossus,
New Colossus,
and the
and the Declaration of
Declaration of
Independence.
Independence.
And we just finished that both in Milwaukee and in Appleton. And now what we're doing, we had the celebration of that in Milwaukee a week or so ago, and we're having the celebration tomorrow evening in Appleton, 5:30. Jill, where is it at? Do you remember? A church in Appleton that we will tell you about before the end of this webinar. So if
Is
you're
it
in,
Prince of Peace or was that last week?
that was
Or is
last
it
week.
okay, it's United something. I just remember that.
United something. So go to United something and ask, no, we'll
It's
get the information to you
it's
before
it's
the end
First
of.
Congregational United Church of Christ. Sorry, I
Okay.
was like inputting stuff into the chat as you were asking.
But I will say this, our numbers are growing for that event, and we're going to have to close registration probably by mid-afternoon today. So if you are in the Appleton area and want to go, sign up right after we get off of this call. Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice was started by Rabbi Bonnie Margulis about 13 years ago. I'm so honored to take over for her, just as one of our panelists, I'm sure is honored to take over for her husband today. And so we both came into this around the same time. And we just work together with people of all different faith backgrounds. And the main thing we focus on are issues of justice and issues of unity. And that's the work that we do. And I'm honored and thankful to be able to do it. And today I'm really honored and thankful to have three incredible panelists talking about the 250th anniversary of our country. And I put that kind of in quotations because it depends on how you think about it. And we all just got off of probably what, if you're like me, you got off of what felt a little bit confusing of a weekend because you probably didn't know quite how to feel with the current reality that we're all living in, and the current way certain people groups in our country are being treated. This 250th anniversary felt extremely complex, and for some of us, maybe it represents the 250th. For others of us, not so much. And we could take this conversation in a million different directions, which is why I've asked our three panelists, Reverend Willie Briscoe, Rabbi John Prosnit, and Reverend Selena Fox, to join our conversation today to truly get an interfaith perspective on the 250th and just our response to it. So, some quick bios in no particular order. Reverend Selena Fox is Senior Minister of Circle Sanctuary, a rural church near Barneveld, Wisconsin, serving nature spirituality practitioners worldwide since 1974. Selena also works as a chaplaincy endorser, author, podcaster, speaker, and spiritual counselor. Since the 1960s, she has been an activist for religious freedom, interfaith collaboration, gender and racial equality, and environmental preservation. She is a religious accommodation consultant for state and federal agencies. Selena serves on the board of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice and on the National Faith Advisory Council of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. So, Selena, why don't you give everybody a wave so we know who I just was talking about in that beautiful bio? Thank you for being here. Next on our list, we'll go to Rabbi John Prosnit. Rabbi John joined Temple Bethel in Madison in 2024 after serving for 12 years as a part of the rabbinical team at Congregation Betham in Los Altos Hills, California. So John is new to Wisconsin, so be kind to him. Originally from New York, he earned his bachelor's degree from Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, and was ordained by the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in New York City. As a rabbinical student, he worked in East Liverpool, Ohio, Melbourne, Australia, the Village Temple in Manhattan, and Temple Micah in Washington, D.C. He likes to be outdoors and loves to play golf, tennis, and basketball. He also enjoys traveling, hiking, skiing, reading, and juggling. And his favorite holiday is, I'm going to say it wrong, but is it Sukkot? Rabbi Praz, I should know this since
Not bad, not bad. Take
How-
it, take it.
You'll take it. Okay, I should know this since I work with a Jewish person all the time with Rhonda. Rabbi Prosnit is married to Erin Gleason, who is an artist and a cookbook author of the Forest Feast cookbook series. They have 2 sons and a daughter, and I'm really excited to look up the Forest Feast cookbook series after reading that. John, a quick wave to everybody so we know who that wonderful bio is from. And last but certainly not least is Reverend Willie Briscoe, who grew up in a small town in Mississippi and eventually landed in Milwaukee by way of Detroit. He began his career in corrections, where he served as assistant superintendent at Milwaukee County Health and Correction. Willie received the title of Reverend in 2009 and was associate minister at the New Covenant Baptist Church. Reverend Briscoe has been deeply involved in various capacities locally with Micah, statewide with Wisdom, and nationally at Gamaliel. And I'm extremely grateful, just like Selena, that we have Willie as one of our board members for Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice. So, Willie, a quick wave. Yes, awesome, wonderful. Thank you so much. And to all of you who took your afternoon to be with us, wonderful to have you. As I like to do in all of these webinars, if you're comfortable coming on screen so we can see your wonderful faces, it's always nicer to speak to faces than it is to names on a black screen. But I also understand that some of you are coming to us in capacities that make that difficult. So if you're able to join us and turn your screen on, we would love it. If you're not, we're still really happy to have you. So the way our webinar is going to work today is I'm going to ask a question about America's 250th, and then one by one, we're going to have our panelists answer that question, and we'll go in different orders each time, and that will be kind of the breadth of the conversation. And then once we get through those questions, we're going to open it up to all of you to ask any or all of our panelists some questions regarding America's 250th. And with that, let's jump right into the first question. Oh, I do want to let you know this webinar, because we have 3 panelists, we didn't want to try to cram everything into an hour. So we plan on this going about an hour and 15 minutes. So we're hopeful that you can stay for that whole time. If you can't, you can't. And but we'll do our best. And with that being said, the first question, and I'm going to start with Selena Fox for the first question, although you will all answer all of the questions. And this is a very personal question, which is simply, how did you commemorate America's 250th anniversary? And then maybe a follow-up to that is, how was that different from previous years? So I'll start with you, Selena.
Thanks, Matt. Well, I celebrate the 4th of July every year in a variety of ways. So this year was extra special because we're at the 250th. On a personal level, I do meditations, I reflect on our country, and I reflect on my ancestors, since some of my ancestors were directly involved in helping to birth this nation 250 years ago. I've done research on my ancestors every 4th of July, and I did a lot of extra research this year. And On a personal level, I'm continuing to keep myself informed. So I've been watching documentaries on television, specials, and I'm checking out social media. Within our spiritual community, we've had a variety of ways of observing this. At our biggest gathering of the year, which is a week-long celebration of summer solstice, we had workshops and special workings, and we do a full moon circle every month online. And I did a special piece at the full moon that happened right before the 4th of July. I've been part of multi-faith events. WIVEC has the Faith 250, and I was in the online version of that. And I have done work with social media and really networking with a number of people from different faith traditions as well as secular humanist organizations. So this has been good in many ways, thinking about the promise of the USA, working towards a more perfect union. However, unlike any of my 4th of Julys in the past, I've been in the middle of multiple religious freedom battles. There are attempts to upend military chaplaincy. So I've been working with military chaplain endorsers and other chaplaincy endorsers. I'm a chaplaincy endorser myself on communicating not only to the Pentagon, but our organizations are being in touch with the U.S. House of Representatives when there was an attempt last week to try to put forth an amendment to the Defense Appropriations Act that would have allowed chaplains to use their own faith tradition if they weren't in favor of other people's faith traditions to discriminate against people serving. So as somebody who is descended not only from an ancestor who was at both Continental Congresses, as well as officers that worked alongside Washington, as well as even a private that survived Valley Forge, I am troubled by the attacks on our democracy, on our rule of law. And I have taken this as an opportunity not only to celebrate the advances that have happened in our country, but to be in a lot of interreligious conversations and collaborations to stand up for religious freedom for all, for church-state separation. Thank you.
Thank you, Selena, and thank you for the tireless work that I know you do every single day, fighting for religious freedom. Let's pass it over to Rabbi John.
Hi, thanks for welcoming me. Happy Independence Day. Well, on a personal level, I spent some time with my family here in Madison. We went down to the neighborhood bike parade and to a neighbor's barbecue, and that was wonderful. Despite muggy 4th of July, it was nice to be with everyone. I even watched a little bit of the soccer game, and I don't know if that's un-American or not, but I enjoyed the World Cup as much as possible. As a community, as a faith community, we did a big celebration on July 3rd. It was as we entered Shabbat, as we entered the day of rest on July 3rd, including spending a lot of time looking at George Washington's letters to the Jews of Newport, Rhode Island. Which was a famous letter that he wrote to the Jews of Newport, Rhode Island in 1790, right after the Revolutionary War, including when he quoted the prophet Micah in that, sort of said that the aspiration for the United States was for each person to live under their own vine and fig tree with none to be afraid. I'm also just dropping in the chat right now a prayer that we read during Shabbat for the prayer for our country. In Jewish tradition, we say a prayer for our country every Shabbat. Sometimes they look a little bit differently, but the one that we wrote, I'll drop into the chat as well. Oops, trying to. So that was our 4th of July. Happy Independence Day. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then we'll pass it over to Reverend Willie Briscoe.
Yeah, thank you, and thank all of you for attending. I celebrated the 4th of July by watching a marathon of The Twilight Zone. I was inside mostly because of the heat, but this was not drastically different the way I have celebrated in the probably last 20 or 30 years by usually using it as a day off and a day with family and a day of barbecue. This year was too warm for that, but I always reflect and meditate on how this country was formed, who formed it, and our education of how this country came to be and what it is today. I'm always amazed that the Native Americans are just left out of this celebration of any honor or any being that they existed. But I digress. As you know, I was born in a small town in Mississippi, right at the end of Jim Crow in the middle of the Great Migration. And as a Black man and being reared by Black parents who were descendant of the original slaves, we were always taught that we had a small space and make the best of the small place you have. And our religion led us to cling to those things that we could call our freedoms and our democracy. And we accepted that position. As I became an adolescent, moved to Detroit, Michigan, and then to Wisconsin, I became aware of where we had come from and how we had gotten to this point and where we still needed to go. And I was aware of the opposition and aware of the education that all Americans had received that was partially propaganda and really a nationalist jargon that was not exactly true. And what I became is angry and somewhat committed to make a change in what we see today, to be a part of the change that I wanted to see. But what is different today, it is not a subtle attempt to hold back those interests that are trying to be a part of the America that they proclaim they were. It is a desperate attempt to diminish our contribution, our existence, and to very pointedly get rid of all of our history. As I saw this morning on the news, the president interceded into the World FIFA Worldwide Soccer to get a player reinstated that otherwise, if he wasn't a player, he would be on the list for deportation. But since he fits in the role of what America deems as useful, the president interjected his power and authority out of all the things that he could attend to make sure an athlete got in to compete for America. This is the America that we're in today, and this is the one that I'm grossly, grossly embarrassed by and what I'm committed to change. I started off by saying I watched a marathon of Twilight Zone that was created by Rod Serling. He was monitored, he was censored, in that he was a progressive thinker and that he wanted to present in his programs the changing of America and the guilt of that America had, but they censored him and kept him relegated to a position that he had to operate under the shadows. I will have further to say, but I will leave it right there. I am not satisfied with America, nor will I ever be until it admits where it came from and that we are all immigrants one way or another, and there is only one original people.
Thank you, Willie. Thank you all for a real thoughtful response to that. And Willie, you set up the next question very well. And the next question is simply, how can we honor American history while continuing to grow as a nation? And we'll start with John on this one.
Thanks, Matt. The first Jews arrived in the United States in 1654 in what was then New Amsterdam, and they were fleeing persecution. Jews had been kicked out of every country in Europe, and the Jews that first arrived in what is now New York came from Brazil, because the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition came after the Jews in Brazil. And so they sailed north, and they eventually found a home in 1654 in New York. And despite some of the Dutch ruling class of New York City at the time tried to get rid of them, they were allowed to stay in New York City. And Jews have been an integral part of the United States ever since then, even though we are a sliver of the population. About 0.5% in the state of Wisconsin. 0.5% of the entire state is Jewish. And so ever since then, it's been part of who we want to be, is to sort of say, how are we part of this civic responsibility while continuing to try to push towards a country of equity and justice and freedom for all people. It is the recognition that when one of us is challenged, when one of us is deported, when one of us doesn't feel the call of freedom, then none of us do. So I do think that part of what the Jewish aspiration is we continue to do the work. We continue to do the work. That doesn't mean we can't be joyful. That doesn't mean at time we can't celebrate this country, which has been very good to the Jews. It doesn't mean that we can't, delight in the success of our neighbors, but it is a recognition that part of citizenship comes responsibility. Part of being in this country comes responsibility, and the responsibility is to push towards a more and just free country for all people, for Jews specifically, but for all people. That's what the Statue of Liberty represents. That's the poem on the base of it that you talked about, that you read last week, right? The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus, right? Give us your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to be free. That was the most important place for Jews to come to, fleeing pogroms and fleeing persecution and fleeing the Holocaust. And we hope to continue to build that as part of who we are today. Oh, you're still muted, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, John. Let's pass it over to Willie.
My faith tradition states that before anything can be corrected, you have to repent of the sins and of the infractions you committed. Then you can be restored, and then you can move towards salvation. There is an inherent responsibility for all of us that lives in this country to call out those things that we see as evil and to push forward to that thing that we are moving towards, which includes our democracy, but more than ever, our inclusion. If everyone is not included, then this country will never, ever achieve the goals that they were meant to achieve. That's whether you are Muslim, Christian, Catholic, whatever denomination that you are, your main tenet to your religion is to push forward that equality and that inclusion of every citizen, everyone that set foot on this land, whether they come from another country, whether they're a citizen of another land. Our traditions teach us to treat them as neighbors, as brothers, and as inhabitants, just as we would want to be treated. I'm afraid of where we are going right now, but I'm encouraged by the people that are standing against it. And I'm encouraged by the signs that not all people believe in this nationalist movement that somehow mirrors some of the things that we've seen all over the world in the past. My tradition teaches that it's easier for a rich man, for a camel to pass through in the eye of a needle than for a rich man to inherit the kingdom of God. What that means is that the leadership that we all acquiesce to is evil, and that they're ultra rich and they're feeding their own pockets, and they have gotten the kingdom, which is the kingdom of God, some of our citizens to buy into this. It is called a trickle-down theory. But we know that the rich man would not even feed Lazarus with the crumbs from his table. And that's what we are witnessing today through the Heritage Foundation, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and all of the others that would promote a separation of people to yield to their authority. That is what the Old Testament prophets were sent to preach against, and that is what we are sent to preach against today. Because I challenge my faith, I challenge all our leaders that we should be speaking against this tyranny from our pulpits, from our corners, and every spot in America. Not favoring party or person, but the principles that makes us all human beings. That we should be preaching inclusion instead of separation. I will leave that right there.
Thank you, Reverend Willie. And Selena.
I'm really glad, Willie, that you mentioned Native American. Part of my ancestry is Native American, and while they're woodland people and not the Haudenosaunee, I did want to respond to this question about history, American history, because many people do not know that the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, many people know it as the Iroquois Confederacy, they were, their laws, their democracy, their structure inspired the founders in creating the Constitution. So I would invite all of you on September 17th of this year, which is Constitution Day, to not only think about influences from Europe and within the USA and its developmenting form, but to actually connect with the Native American roots of our Constitution and our nation. And while I don't know a whole lot about my Native ancestry because Virginia changed its records in the 1920s and we lost that detail, I will say that Native American traditional ways and traditional ways that are rooted in old Europe and other parts of the world, I use the headline or the umbrella nature religion. Across all of those different traditions, the idea that we are all part of an interconnected whole, and we cannot rip away part of it without damaging the whole. So inclusion is really important, and I do think we need to expand our understanding of history not shrink it, not erase it. I'd like to share with you a passage that was also important to some of the founders as the Declaration was created and as Virginia's statue for religious freedom was created by Thomas Jefferson. And this came from English philosopher John Locke, a letter concerning toleration in 1689. Nay, if we may openly speak the truth, and as becomes one man to another, neither pagan nor Mahometan, that's actually a word for Muslim, nor Jew ought to be excluded from the civil rights of the Commonwealth because of his religion. Locke argued that civil rights and property should never be dictated by a person's faith, and Jefferson was inspired by this and wove it into the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. And our First Amendment includes freedoms that are so essential. So I think as part of us taking a look at American history, we need to expand the history, go deeper in the history, and in national parks, in the Smithsonian, and other institutions that are having federal pressure to get rid of exhibits. We need to stand up to that. We need to raise our voices. And I also would give everybody the opportunity to take a look at something called the Religious Liberty Commission report. It just got released, and you need to get your public comments in by July 13th. But there's a lot of information in that report, which was not a pluralistic religious convergence of experts, that would upend our religious freedom, our church-state separation. And we need to redefine, wherever we see this on social media, people trying to depict America as a nation back 250 years ago as some kind of monolithic one type of religion. No, it was diverse. And when the Pentagon shrunk the list of military religious identification codes from 211 to 30 with a memo in May and then a memo about the memo, I will say that Benjamin Franklin was a deist. They eliminated the code for deists. They eliminated the code for a variety of mainline Protestant Christian denominations, including Unitarian Universalists, who had one of the first chaplains in the Continental Army. There are a lot of things that are going on right now under the surface. Mainstream media isn't going to report on it, so I'd invite you to check out Americans United for Separation of Church and State that's tracking this, and a number of other places that are really looking at the importance, especially of upholding religious freedom for all and church-state separation.
Thank you so much for so much to think about. I'm I'm already thinking I need to watch this recording back because I want to take some notes on some of the things that are being said. But I appreciate your perspectives, and what's beautiful about it is they're all unique to, who we are as human beings and what America looks like to us as individuals, whether that's our faith traditions, whether that's our heritage, and I appreciate the very unique perspectives that all of you bring. One question, you've shared a little, all of you have shared a little bit about this, but I want to dig in just a little bit more. When we think about American ideals, and when I say that, whatever kind of comes into your mind, but when we think about that and we think about 250 years of our history, what American ideals, Selena, you were just talking about some of them, but what of those ideals have remained constant, and what of those ideals have evolved? I'll use that word. And this one will start with Willie.
One ideal that has remained constant is that they were going to suppress the vote of women suppress the participation of the poor and totally ignore the participation of people of color. That was why when this was written and came up with, only the rich landowners were supposed to vote, which meant that they were white men. We see a movement going today where they're trying to promote white male dominance. And I would be amiss if I didn't mention that the majority of the signers were slave owners. Slavery still existed almost 100 years after this was signed. Only amendments to the Constitution granted us citizenship, or not citizenship, but freedom. And that is what they are promoting today. So I will second why I am so agitated, why I'm so committed, why I am agitating all religious communities to review your doctrine. Stand up for what I know is written in all of your doctrines, what I know all of you are committed to, and make this nation what it never proclaimed to be spiritually, but it claimed to be in writing. I would ask for a rewriting of the Declaration of Independence, a rewriting of the Constitution, if not in our minds, in our hearts, and an inclusion, because this was not formed as a Christian nation, nor was it formed on religious morals. It was formed on deception because the people that were sent here turned on their supporters and decided that they would keep the riches for themselves and that they would be separate from the ones that sponsored their deliverance. But once again, I will say, those were immigrants that did not assimilate, but denominated, but became dominant and colonized. We must admit that. That is what rings true in my mind, in my consciousness, in my heritage, which is tied to each and every heritage in this country. All of us did not come through immigration. Some of us came through force and necessity. Not only the African Americans, some of the Asians came through forced labor. Until we can come to grips with that and get it out of the minds that we live on the greatest country that was ever formed, that is what we've been indoctrinated in through education, through schooling, even religious organization. We live in the greatest country on this earth because of our riches, because of our military prowess, and because of our status. That is a whole bunch of horse hockey, because we are no better than any other country and no better than any other people. But the arrogance that we have has been indoctrinated into our national being and now being promoted even further, where we have come, I would say, relaxed in seeing children killed and relaxed in seeing boats blown up in the ocean, relaxed in seeing people kidnapped out of their homes and brought to America and put on trial. We must fight against this, because whether anybody will admit it or not, this is how Nazi Germany started. and this is how it was formed. I don't know if I stuck to the question all the way, but you did hear some of my heart rendering and some of the things that I'm passionate about. We live in a little speck in the universe called Earth, and this is the only one that we're going to have. I don't think anybody believes in colonizing Mars. So this is all we have, and we had better learn to live on it.
Thank you, Willie. And never would I assume that a Baptist preacher would stick real tight to the question. That's not my expectation. I really appreciate the direction that you took with that, Willie, because I think when we hear that term, American ideals, the danger almost is to hear that as what are all the good things? But there's some truth, Willie, that I feel like you were revealing there about there's some American ideals that are deeply rooted in some really ugly and disturbing places. So I appreciate the direction you took us. Rabbi Prosnit, what about you?
Thank you, Willie. I appreciated that too. Um, when I think of American ideals, I do think of like the ideal of neighbor on some level, right? And the idea of how do we think, and maybe this isn't an articulated ideal like you're talking about, Matt, but the idea of sort of um, like how do we treat the people that live next to us, right? How do we interact with the individuals that we associate with each day? And Rabbi Joachim Prince, who was actually was born in Berlin, and served in Berlin before the Holocaust, and then eventually moved here and became a rabbi in New Jersey. He was the rabbi that spoke right before Dr. King at the March on Washington in 1963. And what he articulated this idea that said that neighbor isn't we need to think of neighbor not as a geographic term, but as a moral concept, right? And if we think about neighbor as a moral concept, like what an amazing how would we treat people? Like how would we fight for our neighbors? So I love that, and I realize that's beyond American. That could be universal too. But one of the most amazing things that we have the idea is that we can treat our neighbors well, right? And even if it's cliche, right? Like, I do think it takes a village to raise children, right? It takes a neighborhood to raise children. So how do we lean into that as a community and as communities, right? And how do we challenge each other and agitate each other? And I love that Willie kept bringing up this idea of agitation, right? How do we not rest on some sort of high platitude, but to sort of say, do the deep soul searching, to hold the mirror to our own communities, to our own neighborhoods, to our own synagogues, to our own churches, to our own school districts, to our own elected officials, right? Like, what a beautiful idea. And then if we really do think of neighbor as a moral concept, like, what will that push us to do? Like, how would we live in the world differently? So, that's sort of what the ideal that I was thinking of as you posed that question. Um, I do like that because it is an evolution, right? It can actually ask us to change too. It is both reflective as we look towards the back, but also as we move forward. So,
What a great perspective. And, I've been thinking a lot about that, John, about the importance of close proximity and how we do, sometimes when we think about this justice work, we think so big, right? And we think about what we can do, but some of the greatest work we can do is in the context of our own families, our own neighborhoods. And if we think in that context of neighbor, it really influences the way that you approach the world, politics, what have you. So, what a great perspective, Selena.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right in the Declaration. Something I would invite all of us to do, if you haven't done it already in connection with July 4th, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration, is to actually read the whole Declaration. The 56 signers were standing up against tyranny, and they were representing other people. They were the ones that signed it, And as you read or hear read the Declaration, you will see some grievances that are going on right now. Tyranny is going on right now. So for me, at the 250th, it's a real wake-up call that our values, our ideals, things that we've been taught over the years about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, equality, liberty, justice for all, Pledge of Allegiance, liberty and justice for all. What does that really mean? There are repeated attempts coming in many ways. Some make the news, some do not, to undermine America, the promise of America. And we need to uphold liberty, not for a selected few, but for all. Equality for all. As somebody who was deeply involved from being a teenager up until the present time with voting rights, I've been disgusted at what the Supreme Court and other courts have done with the Voting Rights Act. As a woman who couldn't even get to the University of Virginia that Jefferson founded because I was female, I was one of the first women that got accepted to Rutgers University at a graduate level when it was still all male. I have seen injustice. I've been part of the quest to move towards a more just world, a more equal world, a more free world here in the USA. And I am very concerned at values being eroded and undermined in the name of executive privilege and authority. We really need to take democracy as something that's under threat right now, our rule of law. Opportunity. As I grew up, the whole idea, you work hard, you can make things work for you and be successful. There's a lot of these core values: education, opportunity, humanitarianism, being charitable to others, equality, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all these basic things that we have heard for years. These are under threat, and we need to stay educated and get motivated to have collaboration with others, to stand up, to speak out against this, to make sure that we vote and that we are informed voters. We need to uphold the democracy upon which this country is founded, and we need to evolve it in a more inclusive, more truthful, more compassionate, more loving way. So that's my hope as I look ahead for the future of the USA.
Oh, thank you so much, Selena. Last question, then we're going to open up to any questions that others have here. But the last question is, what was kind of bringing it all home for a faith-based meeting here. What role can the faith community play in building a better future for everyone living in America? We'll start with you, John.
Well, I think in every major movement, the faith community has played a major role, right? And I think like at its core, what a faith community is and what a synagogue is and what a church is and what a mosque is, it's a countercultural institution. And a countercultural institution that says like when the world is greedy, we are collaborative. And when the world is frenetic and fast paced, we offer respite, and we offer, at least in a Jewish tradition, the Sabbath, Shabbat, and other traditions obviously have that too. When the world is worried about material gains and success, like we are interested in how we treat one another and how we can serve God. And so those countercultural institutions that churches and synagogues and mosques can be, like, that is how we propel this country forward, right? By leaning into this countercultural nation of like who we are and how we treat people and how we push for justice and righteousness and how we understand mercy and how we are collaborative. The Jewish tradition, like 2,000 years old, teaches the words of Rabbi Tarfon that says it's not, this, you've heard these words in some form, but it is not our obligation to finish the work, but neither are we free from desist from participating. It's a clarion call to civic responsibility. This is something that all of us can do when we work together. Every great movement in this country, from abolition to fight against the Vietnam War to suffrage to LGBT equality, has included strong and forceful religious voices, and they need to continue to. I agree with what the other people have said, what Selena and Willie have said. We are fighting tyranny here, right? And the rebellion to tyranny is obedience to God. That is something that Jewish voices, Christian voices, Muslim voices, non-believers can come together to uphold. So.
Thank you so much. Pass it over to Selena.
I think faith communities can play a big part in moving us forward. Prayer, meditation, pray for our country, pray for those who are engaged in the quest for equality, liberty, and justice for all. Have safe spaces where people can come together and talk openly with each other, different perspectives, but create a safe space for people to listen and connect with each other. In addition to individual faith communities, being part of multi-faith events like this webinar, networks, conferences, working with people of many faiths as well as those with no faith, that's part of our inclusion, to see a better possibility, to share information and work together to move in that direction. I do think it's important for us individually through our own personal religious or spiritual practice, as well as when we are in our faith communities, as well as we are part of an uprising of love, of strength, of empowerment, of hope. I do think an important part of faith communities is keeping people connected with each other, providing support when the news has caused some despondency. I have been spending a lot of extra time in the last couple years hearing and working with people in our community who are directly impacted by reports about what's happening in this country. And I do think we within our faith communities can provide healing and motivation and connection, but it's really important for us to continue to reach out and be part of a much larger force for love, healing, support, and inclusion.
Thank you,
Keep your
Selena.
eye on the prize. I learned from Martin Luther King Jr. I began my activist work in 1963 as a Southern Baptist teenager, providing support for that March on Washington. And I do think that it is possible to have that arc moving towards justice, as he said, and to keep ourselves motivated that it is possible to turn this around and move it in a better direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Selena. Willie?
My Christian faith teaches us there's nothing new under the sun. And the Old Testament prophets continue to remind them of that. Remember where you came from. Remember how you were treated. Remember how you're supposed to treat people. But yet and still, they yielded to greed and to prosperity and wound up in the same position where God had to rescue them continuously. 250 years, we are just toddlers when it comes to civilizations on this planet. We're like the child trying to tell the adults how to behave and taking our toys and going home. I love that Prince Charles, when he was here earlier this year, kind of alluded to that fact. We're just arrogant children trying to puff ourselves up all over the world. And we need to sit down sometimes and listen to the adults. That is where we are now. And that is where we must realize where God has placed us. Because we are going to suffer the same things as all of those other powerful empires in history suffered when they relied on their strength and their riches and somewhat of their knowledge, and not on the God that delivered them from all of their tyranny of the past. We're in the midst of that now. And the faith community has to state what they have learned and what they have seen over the times in history. Because you can't erase history, because that's where we wound up where we are today. We are only juveniles on this journey, but we're acting like we're the adults. Right now, we are wondering how more powerful we are than Iran, who has been through thousands of years of this confrontation. So how are their military being destroyed, their navy, all of their infrastructure, and why do they still possess so much power, so much control over this juvenile nation? It's because we haven't learned from the past. We learned nothing from Vietnam. We learned nothing from Korea. It's not always might. A lot of the times it's right. And it's what you are fighting for. The Vietnamese had fought thousands of years in the same tunnels that they used in that conflict. And that's why they were able to hold out, because they were fighting for a principle. We are just fighting for control and power. And we must start teaching that to our country and our children and our people that are coming behind us. Military might will not save you. Riches will not save you. It's how you treat the least of those that save you. How you treat your citizens will save us. Because once you continue to deport and try to kick out the least of those, who's going to be left? You're always going to have an enemy. And who's going to be the enemy after the brown and black people are gone? Because you have to be powerful over someone. And then what it is, the poor, what is it, those that live on the other side of the tracks? We must get rid of the thing that has led us to the point where we are now and become citizens of a planet instead of citizens of the United States, instead of citizens of Russia and citizens of Ukraine. We must start looking at this as a global majority, as a global neighborhood, and not one person better than the other. Because we are on the road to destruction. whether it's the environment, as we can see now what's happening all over America, weather-wise, all over the globe. We must become citizens of this planet and not citizens of a country. That's my close.
Thank you all. Thank you, Selena, Willie, and John for being here. We've got about 10 minutes if there are any questions that anybody may have. You can either put them in the chat, you can physically raise your hand, or you can raise your hand through the Zoom option through the React. But any questions, you can pose your question to a specific panelist or to everybody is fine. Well, our panelists must have been so wonderful that they left no room for any questions. And with that said, again, just a huge thank you to Willie and John and Selena for being just incredible panelists, and all of your wisdom is so much appreciated. There's so much to think about. And I just want to let you know that next month on August 3rd, we will have our next Faithful Voices in a Critical Hour series, and that's going to be all about democracy protection and specifically about our Poll Chaplain program. So I encourage you to jump on that call, invite others on that call. It's such an important work to be done, is to have a peaceful and faithful presence at the polling locations. If you want to learn more about what WIVEC's got going on, just follow us, keep track of us on our website at wifaithvoices.org/WIVEC, WIVEC. Otherwise, we're on Facebook and Instagram as well. We're doing a lot of great Get Out the Vote work coming up, even tomorrow again in Appleton with the artist Nikki Johnson, and there will be more of that to come in the future. And again, appreciate everyone for taking time, whether you did it here in person or whether you're watching this via recording. Thank you all for your time, effort, and energy, and we look forward to talking to you and seeing you along the road very soon. So with that being said, thank you again to our panelists, and I hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your Monday. Thank you.